Hey, what's up, Packer fans? Welcome to an all-new edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast here on YouTube, the Ben Braden signed to the Packers practice squad edition of the podcast. I know you're all excited about Ben Braden's edition, so let's kick things off with Ben Braden. Not much you need to know. He actually was on the Packers practice squad back in 2019, spent a cup of coffee there, went to the Jets, played in a couple games. He's an athletic guard, fun player that I think has a chance to maybe stick on the practice squad a little bit longer than he did last time, but not somebody that I'd have a ton of expectations for, but somebody I actually liked a little bit coming out of college. Good athleticism. I think his best spot is guard, which is what they have him at, so we'll see if he can actually make anything of himself, but always a player that I liked coming out of Michigan, so excited that he's back on the practice squad. That's all I got to say about Ben Braden, but let's discuss some injury issues right away for this Packers team. Handful of players did not practice for the Packers on Wednesday. Not an insignificant group of players either, to say the least. David Bakhtiari did not practice, which is obviously not a great sign for his availability this week. Tyler Ervin didn't practice again. We saw how much that affected Green Bay last game. The return game was really non-existent, and then just really missing him in that slot as a jet motion type of player. Green Bay just doesn't have a perfect player to replace Tyler Ervin. Tyler Lancaster went out. Tyler Lancaster's been a little bit better than I think people have thought that he's been, especially against the run in the last few games. I think they can survive that. Montravius Adams has been playing better, but again, you never want to see your players out. Darnell Savage, a player that you don't want out facing the Houston Texans, who boast a wide variety of offensive weapons, including players like David Johnson, Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, Randall Cobb, etc. Darnell Savage, he's a very important piece of the back end of that defense. He's been playing much safer than he was a season ago, taking better angles to the football. That's also not a player that you want out. The difference between Darnell Savage and probably Will Redmond in that role is significant, so that'll be one to keep an eye on. And then Bobby Tonyan as well, tight end one. I know I just talked about that he had a really tough game against Tampa Bay, but we've seen him being able to be used as a weapon as a tight end, getting open downfield, catching touchdown passes. He's been better as a blocker, maybe not so much against Tampa Bay, but you still don't want to see him out either. So none of them are ruled out now for the next game against the Texans, but certainly players that Green Bay would like to have out there. Right now they're not practicing, and it's going to be worth monitoring all of those players as the rest of the week goes on. But my main topic today is J.J. Watt. And not Green Bay Packers versus J.J. Watt, but the Green Bay Packers trying to acquire J.J. Watt. That seemed to be the flavor of the day on Twitter on Wednesday. There was an article written by Rob Reichel. This is not me taking any anger out on Rob Reichel or anything like that. The article was very well written. However, I do think it's not fair to write that article and talk about J.J. Watt or ex-player Julio Jones, A.J. Green, whoever you want to talk about, without also discussing the potential ramifications of signing said player. And yes, J.J. Watt would be fun on this Packers defense. And if you want to go that all-in mentality and say, you know what, this is the year, they have to win the Super Bowl, everything kind of starts going a little bit downhill with the salary cap next year. Players are going to be gone. It's not really a rebuild, but I don't think there's any question that right now the window is the most open that it's going to be over the course of the next couple seasons. This is probably the year out of the next couple years that Green Bay has the best opportunity to win a Super Bowl. So I get the, hey, it's time to go all in sort of, conversation. Have you also been watching the Brian Gutekunst and Ted Thompson regimes like I have? Because this is not their MO to go out and get a, buy all. I'm gonna buy somebody now. I'm gonna sacrifice later, and we'll see what happens down the road. This is not that type of mentality. It wasn't even really with Ron Wolf. He did a little bit more, especially with that 96 team, but even he had ways out of it down the road and things that he could do to acquire players later and not really ever have to sacrifice players like, Brett Favre, obviously, and players that he wanted to keep on the team. Ted Thompson, very conservative. Brian Gutekunst, a little bit more aggressive, but he's not going to make a move that's going to sacrifice the future of this team. And J.J. Watt would be a significant move from a salary cap standpoint. I don't think what people are realizing, that is a $9 million cap hit for the remainder of this season if they were to trade for him in the next week or so. That is a significant investment for a rent-a-player. And I know a lot of people have said, well, actually, Andy, he'd be able to play this year and he'd be under contract next year. Well, the $9 million that he would cost this year, $9 million more than what they have on the books right now, not only is going to eat up any additional cap space right now, they're going to also have to free up some space by moving more cap space into next year. And if you haven't taken a look at next year's books are ugly, ridiculously ugly right now. If they just want to sign their draft picks and their their restricted free agents and their exclusive rights free agents and players like that, they are over the cap. They're over the cap. You're talking about cutting players like Preston Smith, Adrian Amos, Billy Turner, Rick Wagner, Christian Kirksey, to say the least, plus doing some restructures just if they want to get, and carrying over the cap that they currently have from this year to next year, just if they want to get a couple of the Aaron Joneses, Kevin Kings, David Bakhtiari's, Corey Linsley's, Jamal Williams is back. So adding $9 million to cap in this year to eat up whatever remaining cap they have, plus trying to open up more space this year by moving cap into next year, you're giving yourself almost no outs next season to try to bring back some of these players. My guess, maybe you could get back one of those premium picks and Jamal Williams, but then you have to cut J.J. Watt. You'd have to cut all those players that I just mentioned, and it's going to make it really, really difficult. Oh, by the way, I've seen the Texans reporters tweet out on Wednesday. Their thought is that the Texans may be able to get a first-round draft pick for J.J. Watt. That's a full non-starter right there. There's no way that Green Bay would potentially trade a first-round pick for half year of a player in J.J. Watt who's been oft injured, add $9 million to their books, and then basically have to cut him next year, along with cutting other players and having the inability to sign some of the free agents that they want to re-sign. There's no way. There is no way. And that the same goes for Julio Jones, AJ Green. It's just too tough to handle with the way that the salary cap is expected to go down next season. It puts a lot of pressure on Brian Gutekunst and the rest of the GMs in the league to try to figure that out already. They're going to want to save as much space as they possibly can. The first round pick is a non-starter. Even if it was a second round pick, that's going to be really tough. Now, already, they're going to probably lose at minimum 2 or 3 of those players that I just mentioned, David Bakhtiari, Corey Linsley, Kevin King, Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams. Probably 2 or 3 of those players are gone almost no matter what, just where things are at with the salary cap. You add a J.J. Watt, maybe they keep 1. And then again, you have to cut J.J. Watt next year, and you're only getting this 1-year rental out of him instead of 2 years. Which also, by the way, means that he has a lot more value to other teams, because other teams would have the space to keep him for 2 years on his current contract with no guarantees, rather than Green Bay, who would be forced to cut him. So Green Bay's probably not going to be in that conversation because there's less value in Green Bay than he would have for other teams who are going to be able to keep him for 2 years under his relatively cheap contract. He's also been off injured, which is a concern, and there's just zero chance that this happens. And again, regardless of what player you want to put in there, those salary cap ramifications are very, very, very real. And if you do lose some of those players next year, regardless of a J.J. Watt trade, let's put that to the side for a moment. If you do lose 3 of those guys that I mentioned earlier and have to cut again, players like Preston Smith, Adrian Amos, Rick Wagner, Christian Kirksey, Billy Turner, to try to keep, a David Bakhtiari and maybe an Aaron Jones or a David Bakhtiari and a Kevin King or something like that. You have some serious holes that you have to fill on your roster with no salary cap space. Guess what you need in order to fill those spots? Draft choices, because you need cheap, talented players to try to come in and fill in some of those holes because you have no money to go out and spend in free agency. Any money you have is going to be signed. This is not a situation or circumstance where you're going to have, money to go out and get some of these $7, $8, $9 million players like Adrian Amos, Christian Kirksey, and so on and so forth. They're not going to have that money. Maybe a couple $1 to $2 million guys that they can fill in, some lower tiered free agents at the end of camp, or end of free agency, I should say, but they're not going to be able to make those splashes. Anything they do is going to be keeping their own players. So keeping those draft picks so that they have the ability to fill some of those spots, also ridiculously important. Now, can they go out and get a player maybe like a Shelby Harris, as I mentioned in a previous podcast? Yeah, they could go and do that. Spending maybe like a 3rd or 4th round pick on a player that can infuse talent on your defense now, maybe help you win a Super Bowl. The opportunity cost of a lost 3rd or 4th round pick isn't that great. The opportunity cost loss of maybe $3 million for the remainder of the season, you can deal with that. you can make some of those trades. But suggesting players like J.J. Watt, A.J. Green, Julio Jones, you better be able to present a reason why that makes sense financially and how Brian Gutekunst would ever get from A to Z of not really being that guy that's going to go all in and sacrifice the future to all of a sudden now going all in and sacrificing potentially some of your top tier talent on the team right now because you went out and traded for somebody right now. Just do not see it happening in any way, shape, or form. That does it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. Make sure to check out the audio version wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You know me, I'll be right back here tomorrow on YouTube, breaking everything down once again. I should have my defensive grades done, so something to look forward to there. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.